Yeah, MedDecode. Welcome to MedDecode. Imagine a government policy that was, well, implemented purely out of wartime necessity, something completely unrelated to health.
Right.
Now, what if that policy, decades later, accidentally created an entire generation with significantly healthier hearts? It sounds like something from a movie.
It does, but it's real history.
Yeah.
And it's probably the ultimate irony of public health. We are diving into a truly fascinating natural experiment today.
That's right. So for you listening, our mission is to unpack what this massive study, we're talking data from over 63,000 people in the UK Biobank, tells us about the permanent power of low sugar during early life.
It's this idea that you're essentially programming your heart for resilience before you can even walk.
And that critical window, that's what researchers call the first 1,000 days.
Exactly. That period runs from the moment of conception all the way up to a child's second birthday.
1,000 days. Why that window specifically? What makes it so important?
Because it's a period of what we call exceptional plasticity. Think of it like pouring the foundation for a huge building.
Okay.
If you use high-quality materials for that foundation, the building is sound for life. But if you start throwing in a lot of, filler, and in this analogy, sugar is that filler, you fundamentally compromise the entire system down the line.
So you're saying the body's metabolic and cardiovascular systems are literally being built then?
They're being built, and they're incredibly sensitive to those early nutritional inputs. The body learns what to expect. A flood of sugar teaches it to prepare for a high-energy world, which might not be good for it later.
But if it starts lean and efficient, that programming lasts.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And while we have lots of studies on this, they're often limited. This UK rationing study is different. It's a rare, quasi-experimental view because the dietary shift was forced on an entire nation all at once.
Okay, so let's set the stage for this accidental health program. We're talking about the UK's rationing policy. This started way back in 1942.
Right, during the war. And it wasn't about health, it was about survival, just ensuring people got minimum calories.
And the government was incredibly strict about it.
Oh, absolutely. For most of that time, an adult sugar intake was limited to less than 40 grams per day.
That's already pretty close to what modern guidelines recommend.
It is, but this was forced. And here's the detail that makes this a perfect natural experiment.
What's that?
It's what they did for the very youngest, children under 2 years old. They were not allocated any sugar or sweets in their official ration. None.
Zero added sugar enforced by the state.
An entire cohort of infants starting life with a clean slate. Then suddenly, everything changed on one specific date, September 1953.
Sugar rationing ended.
Completely. And you can just imagine the reaction, the collective sigh of relief, the tearing open of sweet wrappers after years of austerity.
I can only imagine. The average family must have gone on a huge sugar rush.
They absolutely did. The data shows that average adult sugar consumption nearly doubled almost overnight. It went from about 41 grams a day in early 1953 to around 80 grams by late 1954.
Wow, so that created this perfect, sharp dividing line.
Exactly. Before September 1953, you were born into austerity. After, you were born into, relative abundance.
And that's how the study was designed.
That's the core of it. The researchers took participants born between 1951 and 1956 and simply grouped them by their birth date. Your birthday quasi-experimentally assigned you to either the rationed, low-sugar group or the not rationed, high-sugar group for those first 1,000 days.
And they didn't just have two groups, did they? They looked at the dose of this protection.
Yes, that's a key part. They had progressive exposure groups. So someone might have only been exposed while in utero, while the maximum exposure group was in utero, plus their first 1 to 2 years of life.
Okay, so let's unpack this. What happened when these individuals reached their 50s and 60s? Did that early austerity really create a healthier generation?
It did. And the results are almost textbook perfect in showing a dose-response relationship.
Meaning the longer you're in the low-sugar environment,
the lower your cardiovascular risks were 5 decades later.
That's just incredible. A policy from 1953 still protecting people today. So for that group with the maximum exposure, the ones who got the full zero-sugar infancy, how big was the effect?
It was a comprehensive shield. Get this. Compared to the group never exposed, they saw a 20% reduction in their overall risk of cardiovascular disease.
20%? That's significant.
It is. And it gets more specific. A 25% reduction in heart attacks.
Wow.
The protection against stroke was the highest, at a 31% reduction. and even a 27% reduction in dying from cardiovascular disease.
A 31% drop in stroke risk from something that happened when you were a baby. That's a profound finding. It's like giving that whole generation a permanent health bonus.
And it wasn't just if they got sick, but when. The protection actually bought them time.
What do you mean?
For that most protected group, the onset of cardiovascular disease was delayed by about 2.5 years. 2.53 years to be exact.
2.5 extra years of healthy life, just from that early start.
Exactly.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. Because when you see an effect that big, you have to wonder, is it really the sugar? Could it be something else?
That's the critical question, and the researchers were really robust in checking for that. They ran a couple of crucial sensitivity checks.
Yep.
First, they looked at what they called placebo outcomes, diseases that shouldn't be affected by early sugar intake. Things like osteoarthritis and cataracts.
Right, things that are more about general aging.
Exactly. And they found no consistent link between sugar rationing and those conditions. So that tells you the effect is specific to the cardiovascular system.
Smart. What was the other check?
They used external control groups. So people born in the same years but outside the UK, mostly from U.S. cohorts.
Who didn't experience that sudden end to rationing.
Right. And if the effect was just some general global health trend, the U.S. group should have shown the same pattern. They didn't. No difference based on their birth period. It really isolates the effect to that specific UK policy change.
So all signs point to the sugar restriction as the active ingredient. Now the big question, how? What's the mechanism? Was it just that it helped them avoid diabetes later in life?
That was the first place they looked, the usual suspects, diabetes and hypertension.
Then
they found that preventing high blood pressure and diabetes did explain some of the benefit, about 31.1% of it, jointly.
Okay, a third of the protection comes from that. But that leaves nearly 70% of the benefit coming from something else, something deeper.
That is the big mystery and the big takeaway for the scientific community. They even looked at birth weight, which often predicts adult health.
And did that explain it?
Barely. It only contributed about 2.2%. This suggests it's really about nutritional quality, the absence of sugar, not just overall calories or birth size.
So the real lasting advantage is still largely unknown. Maybe it's epigenetic programming or just building a more resilient system from the ground up.
That's the theory. And they even found some physical evidence for it in the heart itself, decades later.
You mean they could actually see a difference?
Yes, using detailed cardiac MRI data. They found subtle but consistently positive differences in how the hearts of the ration group functioned.
Okay, what did they see? Let's make that technical language a bit more relatable.
They saw things like a small but significant increase in left ventricular stroke volume and a higher left ventricular ejection fraction, or LVEF.
And LVEF is how efficiently the heart pumps.
Exactly. Think of it like the power of an engine with each stroke. A higher LVEF means the heart is just squeezing blood out a little more effectively with every beat, even in adulthood.
So the restriction didn't leave them with a weaker heart. It left them with a more finely tuned, efficient engine.
Precisely. It's the thrifty phenotype hypothesis in action. The body learned to operate optimally under constraint, and that benefit lasted a lifetime.
This history is just fascinating. But what does a policy from the 1950s mean for you, the listener, today? How does this apply to what we should be feeding our kids right now?
And that's the policy goldmine, really. Those restricted sugar limits from rationing less than 40 grams for adults and virtually 0 for infants, they almost perfectly mirror our current best practice guidelines.
The very guidelines we all struggle to meet, even knowing the dangers of sugar.
That's the irony. The WHO recommends keeping free sugars below 10% of your energy intake, which is about 50 grams a day. And modern pediatric guidelines are clear. No added sugars at all for children under 2.
So through sheer necessity, the 1950s UK government accidentally ran the perfect clinical trial that proved our modern advice is correct.
It's the ultimate validation on a massive population scale.
So this deep dive really shows that a restriction imposed by necessity had this unexpected, powerful, decades-long protective effect, proving that first 1,000 days theory is not just a theory, it's a fundamental law of public health.
It is. And that leads us to a final provocative thought for you to consider. If a temporary forced limit on sugar 70 years ago can lead to a 20 to 30% reduction in major heart diseases half a century later, just imagine the cumulative negative impact of today's food environment.
All the highly processed, sugar-rich foods marketed specifically to infants and toddlers.
Exactly. This study strongly suggests that targeted nutritional interventions in those first 2 years aren't just a good idea. They could be the single most cost-efficient way to prevent the chronic diseases that are crippling our healthcare systems. We accidentally discovered the optimal plan decades ago. The question is, are we willing to act on it today?
And that's a wrap on this episode of MedDecode. I really appreciate you joining me today. If something we talked about sparked your interest, or if there's a medical term that's been bugging you, let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this, be a pal and share it with a friend. We'll catch you on the next one.